Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Grand Slam Ground Rule Book 3 by Bree Kraemer, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1, Heath. The off-season sucked. November wasn't so bad because after the long season of baseball, his body, mostly his arm, needed a break. That rolled into December, which was mostly taken up by Christmas and family. January was when he started to get antsy. This explained why he was throwing a ball up and down in the air repeatedly while he paced his kitchen. Fucking January. At 30 years old, he'd been in the big leagues for almost 10 years. He should be used to the misery that came with the off-season, and yet he was bored out of his mind, wishing the season would start already. That thought had him catching the ball, gripping it tightly, and holding on to it instead of throwing it back up. He had no life beyond baseball. It was the only thing he cared about outside of his family, which would be fine if he were still a rookie or even in his first few years. But after 10 years, he should have more. Shouldn't he? He threw the ball back into the air, catching it easily as he wondered if he was actually living his life to the fullest. Maybe he should take a trip or get a hobby. He groaned out loud because none of that sounded fun to him. He liked vacations as much as the next person, but going alone had no appeal. In the early days of his career, he and a few guys would jet off to somewhere tropical and spend a week or two drinking and picking up hot babes. Now, all those guys were married or in committed relationships. He was the lone single guy in his group of friends. As for getting a hobby, no, thank you. Old people had hobbies, not young guys in their prime, not to mention that things he liked to do, such as skydiving, mountain biking, and surfing, were all forbidden in his contract. No activities where he could hurt himself. Zara may be a whiz as an agent, but even she couldn't get a team to remove that stipulation from a contract. Zara Dewin was his sister Hannah's best friend. She was also his agent. She was also in a relationship with Noah Ash, his friend and teammate. Another person he knew in a relationship. Everywhere he looked, people were pairing up. His damn sister was even about to pop out a baby. Sure, he was excited to be an uncle, but why was everyone moving on but him? The ringing of his phone interrupted his pity party. Grabbing his phone, he saw it was Hannah and wondered, not for the first time, if she had some sort of camera in his house to spy on him. She always seemed to know when he needed it most. Hey, he said when he answered the phone. Get on a plane. Only it wasn't Hannah's voice he heard, but her husband Edwin's. Panic set in. What's wrong? Hannah's water broke and we're headed to the hospital. He froze in place. But she's not due for 4 more weeks. This kid doesn't seem to care about my carefully put together schedule. He heard Hannah shout into the phone. Her voice was hinting that she was in some pain. What she said, Edwin said. Heath finally realized that standing there still as a statue wasn't going to get him to his sister. He needed to move. I'm on the way. He clicked off the call and immediately got into motion. After packing a few pieces of clothing, it dawned on him that he needed a flight to Michigan. Shit, what if there wasn't one? He got out on his phone and quickly searched an airline website. Before a list of flights could pull up, his phone rang in his hand. Zara. Of course it was Zara. She didn't even give him a chance to speak when he answered. Meet us at the airport in an hour. I have a plane ready to take us all to Valley Falls. A huge load of stress left his body. You're worth every penny I pay you. And don't you forget it. She hung up before he could say anything else, making him smile. He finished packing, shut down everything in his house, and drove to the airport. It was a local airport that only did charter flights and was a lot closer to his house than LAX. The only time he flew out of LAX was if he flew commercial. He found Zara and Noah already waiting when he arrived. Zara was tapping her foot impatiently. You're late, she said. Actually, I'm not. He understood her need to get to Hannah as quickly as possible. He wanted the same thing. We can't leave before the plane's ready, unless you've somehow figured out how to beam us to Valley Falls in the last hour. We're doing all we can to get there as soon as possible. If anyone could force someone to figure out traveling through time and space, it would be Zara. Babe, he's right, Noah said, pulling her to his side. We can't get there any faster. Zara groaned and stomped away. I hate this. Heath raised his eyebrows in question to Noah. Has she been like this since she found out? Noah nodded. She was supposed to leave yesterday to spend time with Hannah before the baby shower, but she changed her mind at the last minute and now she's kicking herself for it. Stop talking about me, Zara shouted. I can hear you, assholes. Noah just shook his head. It's killing her that she's not there. He didn't seem at all fazed that his girlfriend just called him a name. It was killing him, too. This was his sister, and she was having a baby. A freaking baby. Everything about that messed with his head. He didn't want her in pain, nor did he understand how someone could willingly want a baby. They were tiny and cried and pooped all the time. Plus, what happened if you accidentally drop them? Then what? Yeah, he wasn't so sure babies were his thing. When the plane was ready, the three of them got on and got comfortable. Heath pulled out a book to read, but couldn't concentrate for shit. It wasn't helping either that across from him, Zara was nervously bobbing her leg up and down. Every few minutes, he'd catch Noah squeezing her thigh, and she'd stop, but it wasn't long before the bouncing started again. Grace says Hannah is giving orders left and right at the hospital, Zara said, obviously only talking to Noah, but speaking loud enough for him to hear. Hearing the name Grace had Heath listening in. He only knew one Grace, but there was no way Zara was talking about her. She keeps trying to leave the hospital, but Hannah won't let her. Heath was actively paying attention now, his book completely ignored. Could Zara be really talking about Grace from the animal shelter? The Grace who had driven him crazy with directions and demands for weeks leading up to the bachelor auction he'd been roped into doing? The same Grace whose petite frame and sharp-witted tongue haunted his dreams despite how much he disliked her? There was no way. Why would Grace be in Valley Falls? Why does she want to leave? Noah asked. Think you, Noah? She thinks she doesn't belong there and that she's just in the way. Heath had known Zara long enough to know from her tone that she was rolling her eyes. As much as I try, Noah said, I will never understand women. I thought they were friends. They are, but Grace thinks because they are new friends, Hannah is just being polite, trying by asking her to stay. Heath scoffed before he could stop himself. His sister might be nice and have more tact than Zara, but she'd make it known if she didn't want somebody around. Exactly. Zara threw up her hands. Hannah doesn't do anything just to be polite. This was his opening. Are you talking about Grace from the animal shelter? Yeah, Zara said. Hannah invited her to the baby shower and she came out a few days early to visit. Well, fuck. Now, not only was he about to be out of his league with a baby, but the woman who believed him to be incapable of following simple direct instructions was also going to get a first-hand view of how clumsy he was when it came to babies. He'd only met Grace once, the night of the auction, but he'd talked to her several times, mainly because she assumed that he'd fuck up and do something wrong. Every time he'd spoken to her, she'd berated him and made him feel like a child who'd done something wrong. When they'd finally met in person, he'd been a little shocked at his reaction to her. Some might describe her as plain, but to him she was far from it. Her small frame and lack of height probably had people glossing right over her, but not Heath. He noticed her immediately, even before he knew who she was. Her blonde hair that almost looked white in certain lights had drawn him in, and then her eyes, bluer than any ocean he'd ever seen, finished the job. Then she'd opened her mouth, chastising him for being late. Instead of being annoyed, his dick had gotten hard. Since then, he alternated between being annoyed by her and wanting to strip off her clothes and see what was underneath. All of that when he'd only ever seen her that one time. It had been months since the bachelor auction, and he still thought of her, both with hate and lust. It was a conundrum, that was for sure, and now he had to see her again and somehow keep those feelings to himself. The only thing that had saved him the last few months from blurting out how much she drove him out of his mind and over the edge with need was that he hadn't seen her. The first few months had been easy because he'd been busy with baseball. It'd gotten even easier when his team eventually made the playoffs in the World Series. He only had tunnel vision for one thing during those weeks: winning it all. Once that was over, she'd somehow popped back up into his mind, something he had not been happy about. In fact, he'd been so annoyed by thoughts of her that he typed out text after text to her in his notes, but never sent them. The act of typing them out gave him some relief from his thoughts, not nearly enough. His mind raced with thoughts of Grace, both good and bad, and before he knew it, the plane landed. After grabbing their bags, they had a car take them directly to the hospital where, as far as they knew, thanks to Zara getting updates from Grace, Hannah was still in labor. His mom and his dad were the first people he saw when they arrived in the waiting room. Heath, his mom said immediately, coming to hug him, "I'm so glad you're here." He looked over her head at his dad, who was grinning from ear to ear. "I'm also glad you're here, son, but not for the same reason as your mom. She needs someone besides me to talk to." His mom pulled back from him, shaking her head. "He'll miss all the attention when that baby gets here, and he gets none of it." "How's Hannah?" "She's good," his mom said. "We were told to send you in as soon as you got here." "I'm a little offended she wants him over me," Zara said, hugging his parents. "You were a close second, sweetie. Grace is in there now, but Heath, you can go back." That explained why he hadn't seen Grace, even though he'd checked the waiting room a dozen times since he'd just arrived a couple minutes ago. "Get it together, man." His mom told him the room number and pointed him in the right direction. He heard Hannah's laughter as he approached, and also the laughter of another woman. Grace. He steadied himself outside of the room, taking a deep breath and willing his cock to stay down. Pushing the door open, he said, "Sounds like a party in here." "Heath," Hannah cried out, "finally! Did you take the slowest plane in the world to get here?" "You'd have to talk to Zara about that." He leaned in for a hug, rubbing her large belly. "How's the little one doing?" She sighed. "Already causing problems. She must take after her Uncle Heath." "She?" Heath stared down at his sister. The last he heard, they'd refused to learn the sex of the baby. Hannah grinned and shrugged her shoulders. "I couldn't wait anymore. I made Edwin call the doctor a few days ago to find out." Across from him in a chair next to the bed, Edwin was lounging comfortably. He shrugged. "Whatever Hannah wants, Hannah gets." He's been saying that all day. Heath turned in the direction of the voice, taking in Grace for the first time. Dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, she looked even hotter than when he'd seen her in a fancy dress at the auction. Her hair was down, falling down around the front of her shirt, completely covering her breasts. She looked sexy and fuckable. "Hey, Grace," he said when he finally got his tongue unstuck from the top of his mouth. She gave him a shy wave. "I'm going to grab a drink and say hi to Zara while you guys chat." Heath nodded, staring after her until the door shut behind her. "Isn't that interesting?" he heard Hannah say. "Babe," Edwin said, "don't start." Heath finally looked at them both. "What are you talking about?" "Nice of you to notice we're still here," Hannah smirked. "What are you talking about?" He played dumb because he knew exactly what she was talking about. "Don't you stand there and pretend that you weren't just drooling over Grace as she left." He raised an eyebrow. "Drooling? Really, Han?" He might have been watching her ass as she left, but that wasn't the same as drooling. "Really, Heath? Do you have a thing for her? I thought you hated her." "I don't hate her. I just hate that she treats me like an imbecile," he sighed, shaking his head as he moved around the room to sit on the small couch-like chair in the corner. "Since when are you friends with her?" "Since the auction. When we were working together after I took it over for Zara, she and I hit it off. Why do you care?" "I don't." He most definitely did. "I know you, Heath Bailey, and I know how you are with women. Do not fuck with my friend." "What the fuck, Hannah? How am I with women?" "You sleep with them and move on. Case in point, when was the last time you had a girlfriend?" She had him there. It had been years since he had anyone who fit the bill in his life. The last few years had been mostly hookups. The last few months, though, there had been nothing. No hookups, no sex, no women at all in his life. Unless you counted thoughts of Grace. "In case you haven't noticed, I've been practically a monk these last few months." He was getting irritated. She tilted her head. "You have? Why is that?" "Hannah." Edwin reached out, placing a hand on hers. "Let it go." Thank God for Edwin. Heath gave him a small head nod in thanks. Hannah grumbled. "You never let me have any fun." "I doubt that's true," Heath said. "I'm guessing you had a lot of fun the night you made this baby." While he hated thinking of his sister having sex, poking his sister about anything was one of his great joys in life. Edwin laughed. "He got you there, babe." Hannah looked down at her belly before shouting, "Why won't you come out?" She was frustrated, and he understood that. He just wished there was something he could do to help. "What do you need from me?" "I don't know." She laid her head back on the pillow, closing her eyes. "I just don't know anymore." Edwin stood up, sitting down beside her and kissing her head. Heath watched as he soothed her and told her how amazing she was doing and what a good mom she was going to be. When Hannah started to cry quietly, Heath slipped out of the room to give them privacy and ran right into Grace.